Killer Crenshaw. Thank you for talking to True School Sports.
AKA Superstar, AKA TBO, AKA Rich and Famous, man. Mama, smile, I'm back on your cameras.
Down and give yourself up for somebody else.
Hey, what's going on? It's your boy BT, and I came here to talk some boxing with the thousands of True School Sports subscribers. Now, in this particular video, we're on quarantine, pretty much. We're on quarantine. There's nothing going on in the boxing world, so in this video, we're gonna get a little bit more personal than usual. I'm gonna tell you guys a story of how your boy BT, True School Sports, became a boxing fan. And you know what? I would like everybody watching this video to, in the comments down below, drop your comments down below and tell me how you became a boxing fan. What's your story? How did you become a boxing fan? What fighters or what fight got you into the sport of boxing? I'd be very interested in reading that and seeing just how you got to become, how you became a lover of this great sport as I did. But just my story as to how I became a boxing fan. Before we even get into how I became a boxing fan, we have to actually go back to my father's roots, Pops' roots, because without Pops' roots in boxing, I likely don't become a boxing fan. So with that being said, sometime I'm gonna say in the late 70s, early 80s, when my dad was a kid, growing up in Lowell, Massachusetts. My dad, he grew up in a foster home. He was adopted relatively young. He grew up in a foster home in the Massachusetts area. And he used to box at a gym called Art Romalo's Boxing Club. It was in Lowell, Massachusetts. Now, this gym was the same gym that Mickey Ward trained in. For those of you who have seen the movie The Fighter, the gym in that movie is a gym that my father trained at when he was a young man, when he was a young boy. Now, my dad didn't really have the opportunity to box as an amateur because his foster mother would not allow him to. She didn't really let him do anything, let alone boxing. So he should just be grateful that he had a chance to go to the gym, because she was a very strict German lady who was a foster mother. She took care of so many kids. R.I.P. Grandma Gilly. But my dad grew up boxing in Lowell, Massachusetts at the Art Romalo's boxing gym. He also grew up a fan of the sport. Some of his favorite fighters as a kid were the likes of Marvin Hagler. Marvin Hagler was his favorite, but Marvin Hagler, Tommy Hearns, guys like that. Those are his favorite fighters of all time. So fast forward a couple decades later, I was born. A couple decades later, my dad, what was I? I was 6 years old. So I'm 6 years old. I was living with my dad and my Uncle Andres at the time. Shout out to Uncle Andres. We were living out in Dania Beach, and we all lived together under the same roof. For the majority of my early childhood years, I lived with my dad and my Uncle Andres. I'm gonna say the first, from age 4 to 14, it was me, Pops, and Uncle Andres. So we lived under the same roof in Dania Beach. And we used to watch sports all the time, whether it was baseball or football, hell, even wrestling. We watched everything together. So one particular day, my dad was a big Felix Trinidad fan. We're Puerto Rican, so my dad was a big Felix Trinidad fan. He decides to buy the pay-per-view, which featured Felix Trinidad taking on Bernard Hopkins. Now, this fight was significant because it was the first pay-per-view, or the first significant boxing match of that magnitude after 9/11, and it was in New York City. So I remember this fight very well, and it was the first boxing match I ever watched. And at this time, I'm 6 years old, so like at that time in my life, I was a much bigger fan of baseball. Like baseball was my first passion in life. I wanted to play second base for the Marlins. You know, the Marlins were really good when I was a kid. And I was a big wrestling fan. I used to watch like Rob Van Dam and Stone Cold Steve Austin and guys like that on TV, and I wanted to be those guys when I was a kid. But this is my first like impression of watching boxing, and so my dad was rooting for Trinidad. He's yelling at the TV, all kinds of stuff in Spanish. And I remember when Bernard Hopkins came out, and mind you, I don't know anything about boxing, but when Bernard Hopkins came out, he came out to the song America the Beautiful, and he had the mask on, and everybody's booing him, and he was like the perfect villain. He played the villain role to a T and to absolute perfection. So I liked his aura coming out to the ring, and then he ultimately wound up folding up and stopping Trinidad, which made me a fan of B-Hop. It was a great fight. It was a hell of a fight. So that fight always stuck out of my mind because I remember how sad and dejected my dad was when Bernard Hopkins whooped up on Trinidad. But I thought it was a great fight. I thought it was a hell of a performance from Bernard Hopkins. And as I've gotten older and revisited that fight, I've really grown to appreciate it. So that was the first fight I ever watched in boxing. But even after that fight, I really wasn't like a huge boxing fan. You know, I would watch key fights throughout my childhood, but I wasn't like watching boxing on a week-to-week basis. I was still more of a baseball fan, a basketball fan. I liked those sports more growing up as a younger kid. But I remember through the years watching Pacquiao versus Cotto. That was a big fight. Pacquiao Cotto was a huge fight for me as a kid because I remember at that time I was 14 years old and I was living with my Uncle Patrick. Shout out to Uncle Patrick out there in Massachusetts. Me and my dad were living up in New Hampshire at the time, and my uncle, my dad would argue. They were arguing for like a month before that fight happened, like a month and a half straight, every day for like 15 minutes. My dad and my uncle would argue about who would win between Pacquiao and Cotto, and so they would argue in Spanish. My dad would say, "Cotto, Cotto, Cotto," and my uncle would say, "Pacquiao," and they would just argue back and forth. And I didn't really have a side. I just wanted to see the fight, and Pacquiao whooped Cotto. So then I became a big, a Pacquiao fan. Pacquiao became a legend in my mind after that because Cotto was like the man to me as a kid. So that was a key fight. Cotto Claudio was another one we watched with our family. Pacquiao, Cotto, Mayweather De La Hoya was a big one because I remember that fight happened when I was in 6th grade, and I remember going to school at Olsa Middle School out in Dania Beach, and everybody wanted, like, it seemed like everybody wanted Floyd to lose. So when he won, he became an instant star, and everybody was put on notice to how great Floyd Mayweather was after he won that fight. So these are some of the many fights that kind of captivated my young, impressionable imagination as a kid and as a sports fan and as a boxing fan. And then once I got older, I started following the sport more, like a lot more, and I began to learn about the history of boxing. Guys like Ali, Frazier, Marciano, Sugar Ray Robinson, because I'm somebody who likes to read a lot. So I remember, for me, I used to read a lot of biographies. Like when I would go to the library, I would read biographies on anything that had to do with sports. So whether it's baseball, basketball, boxing, football, soccer, didn't matter. I'm reading biographies just because I love sports and I love the stories that go along with the sports. But boxing seemed to have the best stories and the most interesting stories. You don't get the kind of stories in other sports that you do boxing. So I would read about Marciano and Joe Louis and all these guys, and I'm like 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, just reading about these guys, and like that made me a bigger boxing fan. And then I remember being, what was I? I was like, yeah. And then just through the years, like just watching the sport, appreciating the sport. When I actually started boxing myself, though, I'm not gonna lie to you. When I started boxing myself, I was like what, 18, going on 19 years old when I first started learning how to box. I'm 25 now, so that was like a couple years ago, 2014, 2015. I started learning how to box at Canino's Boxing Gym in Dania Beach because I was going through a lot of stuff. When I was 19, 18 years old, I was really like depressed, and I had all kinds of crazy thoughts about like taking my life and stuff. I won't get too far deep into it, but I was going through a really dark time. So I remember I wanted and I needed a new way to release my energy and frustration about life. So then I YouTubed how to box on YouTube, and I started shadow boxing in my room and learning head movement and all these things. And when I went to Canino's boxing gym and I started boxing for myself, my appreciation and my love for the sport just grew so much deeper. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I wish I would have boxed when I was a kid, because I'm a pretty athletic kid. I played a lot of baseball growing up though. That's the sport I played. I played a lot of baseball growing up. I really wish my dad would have put me in boxing when I was like 7, 8, 9, 10. Because I really think, I'm not even gonna lie to you guys, I'm not even gonna cap. I really think if I would have boxed when I was younger, I could have really done something in boxing. But now that I'm older, I just do it to stay in shape. And whatnot, but that's where my love kind of got taken to a whole new level, and that's where I saw how boxing was just so much more than a sport. You know, I see how boxing has impacted so many lives for the better. You know, because these are like when you're a casual boxing fan, right? When you're a casual boxing fan, they don't tell you about the positive things that boxing does for the inner city and youth and things like that, and how it actually impacts and saves people's lives that come from the ghettos or impoverished backgrounds and things of that nature. They can show you the knockouts and the championship fights and the glitz and the glam and things of that nature. They don't really talk about the positives. So when I learned about how I'm not even talking about professional fighters. I'm the fighters that are like known. I'm talking about people that I just know that you guys will never hear about in your lives, that I trained with side by side at Canino's boxing gym, and what they've came from and how boxing has helped them. When I saw that with my own eyes, I saw how personal boxing was to so many people, and it became personal to me. And it is personal to me because of the fact that I started boxing at a time in my life when I was going through a lot of shit, like a lot of stuff, and boxing saved my life in a lot of ways. Which is why, like, sometimes when you see me in these videos getting animated, and it might seem that I'm coming off as disrespectful towards a fighter because they're disrespecting the sport, or I deem them as disrespecting the sport in a certain way. That's probably why, because boxing is a very personal sport to me. Like, I love the sport of boxing. I love everything about the sport, the discipline. You know, the everything, the discipline. I love the fact that no matter who you are, where you come from, if you have the dedication in your heart to train your ass off and be prepared and hone your skills day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, it doesn't matter what your economic background is. It doesn't matter what your social, standing is. If you have that in your heart and you have that in your fists and you have that in your mind to apply your skills the right way, you can become champion. You can become somebody who came from the dirt and the roaches and the most ghettoest of ghettos, and you can make a great life for yourself. It's the ultimate rags to riches sport. It's the ultimate rags to riches story. They have the ultimate rags to riches stories, and I love the sport for that reason. I love the sport for that reason. The business side sometimes pisses me off. It gets in the way of the sport many times. But if you can separate the two and look at them as two separate entities, boxing the sport and boxing the business, you'll find yourself a lot less upset. And I've learned to do that over the years. And so yeah, I just remember like that. And then as I got older, once I got started covering boxing, because I covered the NBA before I covered boxing, and when I covered the NBA, it was cool, but like covering boxing was so amazing. I got my first chance to cover the sport of boxing in 2015. When my main man, Neil Johnson of Hoop Jab, he actually offered me, he asked me if I wanted to go cover the Shannon Briggs fight in my local area for Hoop Jab, and I can keep some of the content on my channel for myself. And I did it. It was one of the greatest things I've ever covered to this day, because it wasn't just no local rinky-dink fight. It was actually the night of the heavyweights, they were calling it, and they had like a heavyweight get together. I apparently it broke the record for the most heavyweights in one place at one time. They had like Vladimir Klitschko, Vitaly Klitschko, Shannon Briggs, Chris Bird, Larry Holmes, Lamont Brewster, Evander Holyfield, Riddick Bowe, Pinklin Thomas, all kinds of heavyweights, just all kinds of guys who won a heavyweight title at some point in their boxing careers, and honestly, that was one of the most special events I've ever been to. And then from there, I started going to the Heavyweight Factory regularly, because the Heavyweight Factory was right in my neighborhood. I'm from a city called Dania Beach. The Heavyweight Factory is in Hollywood, which is the neighboring city to Dania Beach. So it was a 10-15 minute drive. Maybe if I wanted to walk, it's an hour away. If I wanted to take a bus, it's 20, 30 minutes away. So it was always right there, and I'd go there, and then I began to develop a rapport with the guys like Riddick Bowe, guys that they see my channel now. In 2015, I was meeting these guys and talking to them regularly. Guys like Riddick Bowe, guys like Evander Holyfield, guys like Shannon Briggs, Stacey McKinley, Jesse Robinson, Amir Imam, Trevor Bryan. All these people that you see that I'm friends with now, that I interview routinely. I began meeting them all those years ago when I used to go there, and then we haven't looked back since then. We've gone from there and just established ourselves. I've established myself in the South Florida boxing scene, going from gym to gym, year after year, and I'm very, I'm pretty well known here in the South Florida boxing scene. People know BT, people know True School Sports, and it's just been fun, man. I've gotten a chance to meet so many people from all around the world. Boxing has given me so much in life, as far as the people I meet, the places I've went, the experiences I've had. They would have never happened any other way but through boxing. And on top of that, it's been boxing is to this day, to this day, even if I'm not going to the gym to train regularly, I'm still someone that at my house I shadow box regularly. I move my head and I practice head movement. I do quarter turns in my living room. So boxing to this day still helps me relieve anxiety. It still helps me relieve stress, and I've made great friends through boxing. People that I would consider shut up, Kobe. People that I would consider brothers. People that I would consider really close friends. I've dated girls in boxing. I've not to tell you too much information, but boxing has been great to me. It's been really great to me, and it continues to be great to me. And that's why it's like, because the thing is, I have a lot of knowledge on other sports. Like I know a lot about basketball. I used to cover the NBA. I know a lot about baseball, and I know a lot about other sports. People say, BT, why don't you cover other sports? And my thing is, because they aren't as enjoyable to cover as boxing. Boxing to me is never dull. Even at a time like now, the coronavirus, boxing still isn't dull because of the history of boxing. You can still dive into the history of boxing, and it'll never end because the history is so large and so vast and just so rich that you can never ever know everything in every little factoid about the history of boxing. So even now, boxing's been great. But let me see, did I miss anything? I don't think I missed anything, but yeah, just like being able to go to England, being able to go to Roman Gonzalez versus Cuadras in LA, the WBC convention in 2016. There's just so many great events, great places that boxing has taken me, great people that I met through boxing. And the crazy thing about boxing is like, and another thing I like about boxing is like there's a lot of problems in the world, like a lot of problems humans have. In terms of, I'm not gonna focus on this too long, but like one thing that's frequently talked about here in the YouTube boxing community is race and racism, right? But when you go to a boxing gym, racism doesn't exist. None of that exists. Everybody's the same. It doesn't matter what background, what your socio-economical standing is. When you go to the boxing gym and you step through those doors, everybody's one and the same. And if you could fight, you could fight. If you know about boxing, you know about boxing. If you know, you know. And that's the one thing I love about boxing, is that it's one of the very few places where the world is like that. And if the world was more like the boxing gym, the world would be a better place. That's just my opinion. But that's pretty much my little story, my brief summary, even though we've been talking for 18 minutes, about how I became a boxing fan, why I'm still a boxing fan, and just why this sport is so deep and personal to me. So let me know your comments down below. I'd love to hear you guys' story and things like that. And yeah, like I say in every single video, you can love me or you can hate me, but I'm just a kid from Dania. So until next time, take care, guys.
This is Denise Estrada, and you're watching True School Sports.
All right, thank you.